Hey everybody, this is going to be part 4 of mapping Osiris. And what we have gone through so far is we have looked at some ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics, some art, and some interesting symbolism that they've shown us that have given us some really good clues as to what to look at. They've also given us some deeper definitions into the understanding of what Osiris actually is. When we take a look at Osiris, his hieroglyph is an eye and a throne. And this is the way that E.A. Wallace Budge also deciphered it. Some decipher it as strength of the eye. It definitely has something to do with the eye, and I believe the throne is what it is sitting on right here. But here's another indication that this is definitely what it's talking about, because we see this Jed column right here, or this Jed pillar, fastened on the back of Osiris. That tells us a couple things. It tells us that the Jed column is associated to the back, associated to the spinal column. And then what we've seen in these different cases is that his face ends up being where the pineal gland is. This is the same kind of thing that we saw with the Christian alchemy as well, with Jesus on the cross. His face ended up being where the pineal gland actually is located. Now what you'll notice right here is this is an old Egyptian tomb, and you're going to notice that you have these two lotus flowers. And you notice where they're tied. Now, the tying of the lotus flower, the two of them together, basically represented the union of Upper and Lower Egypt. But spiritually, what it represented is it represented kind of a crucifixion. We also see the same arc, this little dome that you see right here. We also see this in Christian art as well. For example, you see the same arc that you see right here. And this being part of the brainstem. This area right up here is the upper part. This is where the brain is. We're going to prove this here in just a minute. Notice the same arc that you see right here is also contained right here. And you'll also notice that the separation between this upper area right here, which is the brain, and this lower area right here, this area right here that divides the two, is exactly what's happening when you see these two tied together. Those two tied together are dividing the upper and the lower. And this is what's occurring right here as well. So now we have an indication as to where this actually occurs, where this crucifixion occurs. And it occurs right where the spinal cord goes into the base of the skull. That's what it's telling us. Now when we look at Egypt, there was a certain megalith that divided Upper and Lower Egypt. That particular megalith was the Great Pyramids. And they're located right here where this spinal cord meets or goes into the base of the skull, which is what we're seeing right here. This is the same depiction, basically. And so this is what's happening right here. So the pyramids represented that area where the two lotus flowers were tied together, representing the union of Upper and Lower Egypt. You can start to begin to see what the ancient Egyptians were doing here. There's more to this than just placing a building wherever they so desired. They were looking at Egypt. They were looking at what was happening here, and they placed these megaliths in very specific positions, in very strategic locations. In fact, these people were absolutely brilliant based on what I'm seeing. Everything they did had a reason. All of the geometry had a reason. And it was all to help those who eventually came to understand what they were trying to teach. And it's lasted forever. It was just brilliant. Somehow they were able to carry this knowledge because they knew that we would need it someday. We would need to go back and take a look at this stuff. The Great Pyramids not only represent that area that we saw in that cathedral and in that tomb, but it also is what we call the pyramids of the brain nowadays. And the pyramids of the brain are also located right where the spinal cord goes into the base of the skull. Now, these are just way too many coincidences to be a coincidence. And so we must look closer to see what the rest of those pieces of the symbol mean. So I just happened to be thumbing through some ancient Egyptian art, and I stumbled across this pyramid. Now, this pyramid is extremely important. It gives us an indication of what they're showing here. I want you to notice what you see on this and what you do not, or what you see in this, but what you don't see in this right here. Notice that the pyramid that you see here contains this symbol on up. But from the two lotus flowers tied together, you don't see it. And what that basically is telling us here is, since this represents the pyramids in Egypt, and everything above it represents this pyramid, we've now confirmed where the base of the pyramid belongs in Egypt. And the base of the pyramid that we placed, according to that diagram, the base of the pyramid belongs right where the actual pyramids are themselves. We know that because the two lotus flowers tied together represent the Great Pyramids. The two lotus flowers tied together represents this right here. So everything from here down is not shown in this diagram. Only this up, which means that the pyramid belongs exactly as I had put it. So it's another confirmation that we have the correct placement of the pyramid. Now, there is one extra thing that I have done here that I didn't notice before that I have updated. And that is, if you have seen these diagrams before, for example, with the pyramid and Earth and the moon and them squaring the circle. If you remember the last time when I was showing you that the king's chamber here was a little bit to the right. But now, after squaring the circle, exactly the way that you see it right here, this construction of the pyramid, the way that they have it, and placing it where the base, right here, where the two lotus flowers tied together, where the Great Pyramids are, you notice that the king's chamber, this right here, basically, being Osiris, is basically right above it. It's right above it. One of the other things I noticed that I found interesting when we just look at the land here, and I'm not so sure that this has anything to do with it at all, but I just found it kind of interesting, and that is that these air shafts seem to follow the lines of the land. You'll notice this air shaft here seems to follow the line of this land, and this air shaft here seems to follow the general line of this land right here, as well as this one right here seems to follow this line as well. And these are all, of course, different angles, but they seem to be relatively close. You're also going to notice, too, we kind of have another confirmation here, because the way that we have the king's chamber, the queen's chamber, and this lower chamber down here, falls right in line with where the spinal cord would be. And when it comes up, you'll see that that what happens to the spinal cord when it gets up here and it reaches the pons or the midbrain or the pons area, all of them bend, and they bend at about a 17.5 degree angle. I've got two different people's anatomy right here, and you're going to notice that when we start taking a look, when I show you this particular diagram here in a minute, what we're going to do with it, I'm going to show you the level of detail that nature actually presents to us here that even gives us more confirmation. But if you notice, their spinal cord comes up and then it kind of veers right. You see both of them do that, and they're both relatively the same angle. When you take a look at the back side of them, they end up being somewhere around 17.5 degrees, which is the exact same angle that we see between the Queen's Chamber and the King's Chamber. Right here is an example. What you see right here is we go straight up here and we do an angle. The angle going from the center point area of the Queen's Chamber to the center point area of the King's Chamber. That's the angle that we're interested in. You'll notice that the same angle exists right here, and both of these are 17.5 degrees. Now obviously, depending, and you'll have to understand too that when the ancient Egyptians, when they did sculptures, when they did of various people, they used sacred geometry. And the sacred geometry obviously does not apply to every single human. What it applies to would be a geometrically perfect human, proportionally. And so this is what they did here with the brain. And based on what I'm seeing with the various sagittal brains that I'm looking at, they all seem to fall pretty close within the 17.5 degrees angle that we're seeing right here. And so now, having seen the Egyptian art, and we saw where the different areas of the symbols were showing us different sections of Egypt, we now know that the pyramid is placed correctly, because everything below this particular symbol here belongs south of the Great Pyramids. Everything above these two belongs in the pyramid that we placed. And we squared the circle, and that gave us the King's Chamber right underneath where Osiris is. So everything seems to be mapping properly so far. And just a quick walkthrough to show you the human anatomy and what you can get out of nature by looking at it. Notice the arteries, the blood flow, or the circulation to the brain area, and what we see here on the Nile. And we showed that there were two major areas, basically. This blue artery that you see right here, and this one coming up and arcing to the right, were the same as the two main waterways that we see running up the Nile Delta. Here were the examples that I gave on that, showing you A and B and how the waterways moved up on 4 different examples of patients and a diagram. Now let's look at another confirmation that we have here real quick. So we have all this confirmation that we have got all the variables right. The pyramid obviously has something to do with the brain area, something above the right where it goes into the skull. That's what we're dealing with when we're looking at the pyramid. They showed us that. And so what we need to do now, we need to see what else the Egyptians were showing us. We've already taken a look at the waterways, but now let's take a look at what the land itself is actually showing us. So I'm going to use this example right here. Move this over here, and we'll knock down the opacity so that we can see both the land and this skull right here. And then we'll zoom in just a little bit so you can see it better. Okay, so when we're looking at this thing side by side, there should be a couple of things that really stand out and are very obvious to you. There are at least 3 things that you should be able to see right now. the first thing that you'll notice, let me just back it up just a little bit more. There we go. The first thing that you'll notice is this area that you see right here, which actually turns into, believed to the Suez Canal, this green area right here. And you'll notice that that follows, if you notice that it is a certain width, and then right here it spreads out into kind of like a triangle. That is the same thing that you see happening right here. And right under the frontal lobe, right under this frontal lobe that you see right here, is the pathway traveling to this area. This is the eye, and so is this. And they both follow the same lines. We'll see it when it all comes together here in a second. This triangular area that you see right here, this light brown area, will correspond to this first part of the frontal lobe that you see right here. So there's two areas. Now, here's the third area that's also going to line up, is you have, of course, the spinal cord, and that's going to line up to this area right in here. And then another kicker, which will be the last one that we look at. So we'll have a 4 or 5 point area, all proportional, lining up. But I want you to take a look here at the tongue. I want you to take a look at the shape of the tongue, how it is right here, and then I want you to take a look at this area right here. And you see how it comes around and curves around right there? Now let's put it all together. So I know that it's all going to fit if I just move the tongue right here that you can see. You see how these both follow the same curves? Well, if I move that over, it's going to fit just like a puzzle. There we are, basically. Now, based on the tongue, what you're looking at right now, you see how it fits into that little puzzle piece right there? Now take a look at the eye area. Do you see how that falls right in line with the optic tract? Now look at the tongue again. Now look at the spinal cord area. Spinal cord area is right in line with that tract. And you remember the first part of the frontal lobe, that triangular area, the brown area, which is right up here. Well, look, it falls right in line with that as well. Knock the opacity down just a little bit so you can see. Look at the tongue area. See how that fits in there just like a puzzle piece? Look at the eye area, the optic tract. You see how this this optic tract that's sitting right under the frontal lobe right here, it runs along this frontal lobe right here and reaches the eye area. You see how that goes in there just perfectly like that? And the spinal cord and the tongue. And here's another area you might notice. The space between the tongue and the chin area. Look at the land dividing the land and the water there. So this is exactly what the ancients were showing us. Now here's the deal. You have to be a good analyst when you look at stuff like this, because obviously these two people are different. But notice their tongues are shaped the same. They have the same internal areas for the brain area. Also notice this too. You see the way the land comes around? It's brown and right in here. Well, see, you'll notice this. It also follows the same as you see right here. So the differences from one human to the next, when you start getting into the internal parts of the body, are pretty close. And you also have to understand that you should be. Just think of it this way. If you were a neurologist, it doesn't matter the variances between one human and the next, because they are small enough so that you can actually be a neurologist. If the variances between one human and the next were too great, you wouldn't be able to tell what you were looking at. And so with that logic being used, then we should be able to look at 3 different versions of a human and tell that we're looking at the same areas. But more than that, when you take one of these and you put it on top and you have 4 or 5 points, like we just showed, all proportional and all following the same general look as well, well, you're more than welcome to run the calculations on the probability of this kind of thing. So when you take all that into account, you take into account what the ancient Egyptians were showing us in their art, the way that the Nile and the Nile Delta looks, the waterways, the pyramids of the brain, the location of Busiris, the location of the pineal gland. Those also match up. So all of these things, and even including down to the lower part of the nervous system. One reason I'm always stressing that, for example, you need to go and take a look at human anatomy, and you'll see that I have a huge library of different areas of the brain so that I can examine all of the variances myself. What I'm basically doing is something that any neurologist would do as well. That's one I want to show you in just a second. But look, if you look at all these, it's important to study all these so that you can see the variances between them, and you know what makes sense and what doesn't make sense, just like a neurologist would. Let me show you something really quick about this particular one. Okay, so let's take a look. Let's look at the whole curvature of the spine, minus this loop right here. And I guess the loop is in a way kind of provided to show us the curvature that we see right here. But there's something else I want you to notice about it too that even kind of gives us more confirmation. I want you to notice what's actually happening here at the end of that spinal cord. You see how it kind of frays and looks kind of like a spider or something. It looks like it's got legs on the end of it. Well, let's take a look. This is actually a real human nervous system right here. And when we go all the way down to the bottom, I want you to take a look at what it does. And now compare that to what you see at the very bottom of the Nile. Same thing, basically. So all of these confirmations tell us that this is exactly what the ancients were showing us. And so then, of course, they took us to Orion, and we're going to start taking a look at that here in a little bit. But I wanted to show you, and I have kind of an updated version of this thing right here. I don't know if I like, this is a diagrammed version of it, but what I want you to notice about it is that if you look at the lower chamber here, and you take a look at the 2 chambers here, you see how they follow that line that is that, and this is a diagram version, so you can see this isn't just a some random human. It's actually a diagram, and this whole pons area follows the same thing that we're seeing right here is where Busiris is, right above. It's almost right in the middle, but slightly above. And I guess it would be slightly above where the pineal gland is located, but it's closer as far as left and right goes. So squaring the circle was definitely the right thing to do. Here's where the Great Pyramids are located, right where they're supposed to be, where the 2 lotus flowers were tied together. That's what we're looking at right here. So, I wanted to bring this to you guys and show you the latest update. And Stay tuned. We've got more to come.